They didn't sell her for money. They sold her because they couldn't stand the sight of her anymore. Montana. Winter of 1883. The wind tore through the town square like a starving beast. And in that bitter cold, Nora Vale was dragged before the crowd, wrists bound with rope, her heavy wool dress sweeping through the slush and snow. She was overweight from illness, her right leg crippled, her walk swaying like a willow in the storm. Every eye turned her way, half pity, half contempt. Her uncle stood on the block, shouting at the crowd as if he were hawking a broken mule. No one bid, no one spoke, no one wanted her, until a voice came from the back of the market, low, steady. A man stepped forward, Caleb Rowan. Not dressed in finery, just a bearded drifter in a weather-worn coat crusted with snow. Nobody knew where he lived. Folks whispered, up in the high mountains, where even the wolves won't go. He said just 5 words, quiet enough that the whole market froze. I'll take her with me. No one understood why. Maybe because he saw in her what the rest of the world had lost patience for. A soul that wasn't dead yet, only buried beneath the snow of ridicule. The wagon rolled out of town, leaving behind bitter laughter and curses. Nora huddled in the corner, lips cracking in the icy wind. She didn't ask where he was taking her, and Caleb didn't tell her. Between them stretched silence, the only language honest enough to share, and she thought, maybe dying in the frozen woods would be kinder than living among people. Caleb's cabin sat buried on the slope of the Bitterroot Mountains, where the wind howled like lost souls. When he opened the door, warmth rushed out, firelight popping, wood snapping like the heartbeat of the living. He stoked the flames, set a bowl of stew in her hands, never looking, never asking. The smoke and broth stung her eyes, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had given her anything whole. His voice was rough, rasped from years of cold. Eat. Out here. Nobody stays hungry for long. It wasn't pity. It was the voice of a man who had lived too long with hunger and solitude. That first night, Nora didn't sleep. The wind whipped the roof. Snow pressed heavy on the windows. She lay awake, glancing around. 2 chairs, 1 table, 1 bed. He didn't take the bed. He stretched out by the fire, arm across his forehead, as if he were used to dreams colder than the floorboards. She wondered, why would a man choose to live apart from the world? Was he running? Or was there simply nothing left worth holding? And just as her eyes were closing, his voice drifted through the storm. Don't fear the wolves. So long as the fire's strong, they'll stay out. She whispered back, barely loud enough for herself. And the silence. Who keeps that out? At dawn, Caleb rose to find her struggling down to the stream, pulling water with trembling hands. The heavy dress dragged through the snow, her breath steaming white, her fingers raw and red. She was slow, but she never stopped. When she nearly slipped, he caught her, and she gave the faintest smile, her voice lost in the wind. I'm not strong, but I keep trying. He only nodded, watching her as though he were staring into his own past. That evening, snow fell light as dust. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, he sharpening a knife, she mending a torn sleeve. No words, but the silence was no longer frightening. It felt like warmth, quiet, steady, alive. And in that moment, Caleb Rowan realized his cabin had found a second breath. And Nora Vale, for the first time in years, felt like she wasn't a piece of livestock to be priced and sold, but a human being, a soul still worth keeping. They say some houses remember, but Caleb Rowan's cabin, it didn't remember. It hated. Every time someone laughed, the wooden beams creaked as if the walls themselves disapproved. Maybe because for years, the only sounds here were the wind, the axe, and the silence of a man who'd lost his faith in people. But that winter, Nora Vale stepped inside, and with her came warmth, a trembling voice, and the sound that cabin had forgotten, the breath of another soul. The first morning, light slipped through frosted windows. Caleb woke to the smell of ash and a faint steam rising from the porridge pot. On the table sat a bowl of warm water, and a pair of gloves clumsily mended by hand. The heavy-set girl was still there. She hadn't run. She hadn't wept. She only limped quietly through the cold kitchen, moving like someone performing a ritual. The ritual of trying to earn permission to exist. He watched her in silence. She wasn't beautiful. She wasn't graceful. But there was something steady in her movements, like a pine tree standing stubborn in the snowstorm. And when she finally spoke, her voice was so soft it sounded meant for the wind. "This house doesn't like people laughing. I tried." Caleb didn't answer, but the words clung to him, as if she'd spoken something he already knew. That whole day, Nora never stopped. Stacking wood, mending clothes, scrubbing pots, feeding chickens. And each time she bent to work, her thick dress spread around her, hiding the limp in her leg, if only for a moment. Caleb hadn't asked her to. He didn't stop her either, but he realized, for the first time in years, his house no longer echoed with loneliness. At dusk, she brought him a bowl of stew. He ate without comment, but she caught the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. And strange as it was, the floorboards groaned beneath them, like the cabin itself resented that flicker of warmth. That night, they sat across the fire. Flames lit Nora's face, making her look closer, more real. Her eyes lingered on the crack in the wooden wall. She whispered, "Do you ever think this house gets lonely?" Caleb set down his cup, gaze drifting. He didn't answer. So she went on, her voice small, fragile. "I think it hates laughter. Because the laughter that once lived here never came back." The words froze him. His hand clenched the worn handle of his knife. She didn't know. Once, this cabin had been filled with laughter, and the woman who brought it here died inside these very walls. When Nora climbed upstairs to sleep, Caleb sat still, staring at the crack in the wall. And in the silence, he heard them again. Those old echoes, the laughter of a woman he once loved. Blood. Fire. Memories buried until Nora's words had torn them open. He glanced upward. Her shadow moved faintly in the lantern's glow. Peaceful. Unaware. She didn't know that every time she laughed, the cabin shivered. And so did his heart. The next morning, snow fell thick and heavy. Nora rose early to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Outside, Caleb swung with raw force, as though breaking something deep inside himself. She came with a bucket of water, nearly slipped. Instinctively, he caught her. Her skin was ice cold against his palm, and for a moment, both froze, as if they'd crossed a forbidden line. She looked away. "I only wanted to help." His voice was low, rough. "You don't need to help, you just need to stay." Simple words. But for Nora, they were something she had never been given in her life. By afternoon, the snow had eased. They sat again by the fire. Her stitching quietly, him watching silently. Neither spoke. Yet the quiet between them had changed. It was no longer empty. Outside, the wind whistled through the rafters. And somewhere in the draft, a sound rose, like laughter, twisted and broken, lost in the storm. The cabin groaned, then fell into absolute silence. Nora shivered, lifting her head. "Did you hear that?" Caleb's eyes turned to the window, heavy as stone. Yes, he'd heard it. But he knew it wasn't the wind. It was the old laughter, finding its way back. That night, the snow fell so heavy it smothered even the cries of wolves. The fire burned low in the hearth, embers glowing faintly red. And Caleb Rowan felt it. Something was wrong. Not with the cabin, with his own body. A sudden dizziness struck him. His throat turned dry, his vision blurred, and every heartbeat felt like it was being squeezed by an iron fist. He staggered to the table, where the bowl of stew from last night still sat, cold and faintly metallic. In that instant, he understood. The thing killing him was inside the stew Nora Vale had made. He didn't call out, didn't shout her name. He lurched toward the door, but his boots slipped on the frozen boards. His body crashed to the floor, chest locked in violent spasms. Through the haze, he saw her, Nora, stepping out of the shadows, her face aglow in the firelight, disturbingly calm. She knelt beside him and whispered, voice low and steady, nothing like the timid girl he'd brought home. "Don't be afraid. Your body's reacting." I measured the dose. Measured. The dose. The words cut through the fog. He wanted to ask, what dose? But his lips no longer moved. When Caleb opened his eyes, daylight streamed through the frosted windows. The pain was gone. The crushing weight in his chest lifted. He felt alive. On the table sat a bowl of dark, bitter liquid. Nora was beside the fire, eyes ringed with exhaustion, hands trembling as she kept the flames alive. Her voice was quiet, almost guilty. "I didn't poison you. I purged you." She met his eyes, steady despite her fatigue. "Your liver was drowning in rotgut. If I hadn't done it, you wouldn't have lived through the winter." Caleb stared, hearing nothing but the pounding of his own heart. Last night, he thought she'd tried to kill him. Now she swore the very poison had saved his life. She spoke again, as though reciting from memory. "I worked in a Wyoming infirmary once. They taught me to brew remedies from roots and silver ash." Her eyes flickered in the dim light, haunted. "But I learned something else, too. People die fastest when they trust the wrong hands." Her words made him flinch. There was pain in her gaze, pain of someone who had seen too many deaths, too much betrayal. And softer, she added, "I didn't want you to die like they did. I can't stand that smell of blood anymore." That afternoon, the storm broke. Caleb stepped outside. Sunlight glared off the snow like blades. He remembered collapsing, remembered her face above him, not panicked, not remorseful, just resolute. Had she saved him or tested him? When he walked back inside, she was hanging bundles of dried herbs against the wall. He stopped behind her, voice gravel low. "If I'd died last night, what would you have done?" She didn't turn. "Buried you out back, in the softest ground I could find." "For pity's sake?" "No, for debt." Then she turned, her eyes dark and steady. "You pulled me out of that market. I pulled you out of yourself. Now, we're even." That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring at the pot that had nearly undone him. Among the ashes lay fragments of dried herbs. He recognized the smell, not medicine. War herbs, used to cleanse blood, or, when mismeasured, to cripple even the strongest man. He climbed the stairs softly. Nora slept on her side, an old letter peeking from her coat. He eased it free, eyes narrowing at the faded ink. "If anyone finds this, tell Grace Vale they killed the wrong person." Grace Vale, her name, her kin. But the next line froze his blood cold. "A man named Rowan. He's the only one left alive." The wind howled through the Bitterroot pines, carrying a laughter warped and hollow. Caleb gripped the letter tight, his pulse thundering. If the words were true, the girl he'd rescued might be here not for shelter, but for vengeance. Back in the kitchen, he searched the hearth. Beneath the ashes, he found a small glass vial. Inside, dark fluid, metallic and heavy. She'd called it an antidote, but as he scraped away the old label, the faded words beneath clawed up at him. Mercury compound for preparing the dead. Dawn came slow and gray, like an old scar dragged across the face of the sun. Caleb Rowan sat hunched in his chair, the hollows under his eyes deep and raw. He couldn't tell if he'd slept or simply blacked out in that fevered stupor. The old letter lay open on the table beside the small glass vial he'd fished from the ashes, the metallic smell still clinging to it, heavy and private, like a secret that shouldn't be touched. The name on the paper, Grace Vale. The name everyone had whispered about. The girl who died because she trusted the wrong people. Was Grace blood? A memory? A wound Nora refused to name? Caleb went outside before the thaw. The wind lashed his face with a dozen tiny whips. From the ridge, he peered down into the valley. The same valley where once, years before, he'd watched an encampment burn after the Bitter Creek conflict. He could still smell the scorched hide in his mind, still hear the screams caught in the heat. Among those flames, there had been a 16-year-old girl dragged from the hut, bodily wounded, and him. He had done things he'd strenuously tried not to remember. Maybe that girl had been Grace Vale. Maybe she had died. Or maybe she had survived and come back with a new name, Nora. When he returned to the cabin, Nora was outside hanging herbs to dry on the porch. The morning sun dusted her hair gold. From a distance, they looked like any other pair who'd managed to survive the mountain winter. Calm, ordinary, almost domestic. But every movement of hers felt like a cipher to Caleb. Plain gestures stitched over a hidden pattern. He asked, voice rough as shutterwood, "Have you ever known anyone named Grace Vale?" For a moment, she froze. Just a fraction. And then she smiled so faintly she might have been smiling at the light itself, not him. She didn't meet his eyes. "Grace is a pretty name," she said. "But no. I never knew anyone by that name." A lie. It slid so smoothly off her tongue that the smoothness made him colder. That afternoon, when she went out to chop wood, Caleb did something he had sworn he would never do. He opened the door to her room. It felt like a betrayal in the doing. Under the neat pile of blankets, he found an old pair of leather boots, heels worn thin but otherwise oddly clean. He turned them over. Tucked into the lining, folded small and careful, was a scrap of paper. He unfolded it. A woman's handwriting stared up at him, steady, hard as iron. They say he lives alone on the mountain. They say he's forgotten everything. But I remember. I remember the night at Bitter Creek, when he gave the order to burn the camp. I will not let him die in peace. Blood went cold behind Caleb's eyes. His hands shook, but his gaze pinned to that sentence. I will not let him die in peace. He refolded the note and tucked it back into the boot, then walked outside as if nothing had changed. Snow began to fall. Nora knelt at the woodpile, breath puffing white in the air. Small, fragile, a part of the winter itself. Caleb watched long enough for his fingers around the axe to bruise. For a terrifying instant, he pictured the worst. Not that she'd come to kill him outright, but that she'd driven him to kill himself under the crushing weight of remembered sins. Night settled, and the wind started a different song. She sat by the hearth sewing, voice soft, and asked him, almost casually, "Do you believe people can really change?" His answer was dry as cinder. "No. People only learn how to hide the parts they hate." Her mouth curved in something close to pity. "Then you're still learning, aren't you?" She said it like a scalpel, straight into a place inside him that hadn't healed. When she finally slept, Caleb sat at the window and watched the snow fall in the feeble light. In that dimness, her face looked altered. Cheekbones sharper, her mouth set in a way that made her nearly unrecognizable. Her eyes still glossy with some emotion not yet spent. For a moment, strange and unwanted, he felt pity. Pity for the woman who had folded hatred into gentleness just to survive. He asked himself a question he hated to hear. If she had come to kill him, would that not be the fairest end for both of them? An execution of old debts? Outside, the trees moaned and a lone wolf raised its head and howled. Caleb poured whiskey into a glass and drained it, felt the burn cut through the cold, then said in a voice so low he could have been speaking to the log on the hearth, "If I'm dead tomorrow, at least you'll have paid back half your debt." When he turned, the boots that had sat by the bedside were gone. The scrap of paper he'd tucked back into the lining was gone too, and the back door of the cabin was wide open. That morning, the sun refused to rise. Only a pale smear of light stretched across the sky like an unhealed wound. Caleb Rowan stepped out of the cabin, his boots crunching deep into the drifts. In the snow lay a trail of uneven footprints, small, staggering, the walk of someone who limped. He followed them. Each step was swallowed almost instantly by fresh powder, as though the mountain itself was trying to cover its secrets. Nora Vale was gone. All she left behind was a single line scratched into the wall. "The memories you keep may not be true." The wind hissed through the pines, sharp as a blade. Caleb trudged on, numbness spreading from his fingertips, the cold gnawing at bone and thought alike. Yet even as the mountain stole his breath, fragments of the past forced themselves up from the dark corners of his mind. Bitter Creek, the flames, the screams, and the girl, blood on her face, her eyes not filled with hatred, but with pleading. He remembered raising his gun, the shot. But when the smoke cleared, it hadn't been her who fell. It was one of his own men. Had his memory fractured from that night on? Was everything he remembered already twisted? On the mountainside, a flash of color caught his eye. A shred of red cloth snagged on a branch, a scarf. Nora's scarf. He clutched it. It was still warm. A few yards farther, the footprints became a drag mark, like someone crawling or being pulled. His heart thundered. He broke into a run. The wind tore at his face, the snow blinding white, the world breaking apart into breath and panic. And then he saw it. In the middle of the flat, untouched snowfield. A hand. He fell to his knees, clawing at the snow until his fingers burned numb. A coarse brown sleeve emerged, patched with brass buttons. Then a face. His own face. The corpse lay staring up at him, eyes clouded white like frozen glass. A wound at the throat stiff with dried blood. Caleb reached out with shaking fingers and touched the skin. It was stone cold. And across the cheek, a scar. The same scar that ran across his own. He staggered back, gasping, the air thin and savage. His voice rasped into the silence. No, this isn't. A voice cut in from behind him, soft, clear, as merciless as falling snow. See? I never lied to you. Nora stood there, hair whipped wild by the storm, a pistol steady in her hand. Her coat was splattered with blood that had already turned black. She pointed the gun down at the body in the snow. Her words came measured, almost like a lesson. This is who you were. The man lying here, the one standing before me, is only the remnant, the part that tried to forget. Caleb's lips moved, trembling, not from the cold, but from fear. I don't understand. You don't need to, she said quietly. You only need to remember. She tossed something at his feet, a shard of glass rimmed with ice. He picked it up, stared into it. There was no reflection, only the blank white of snow. No shadow, no face, nothing of him. Her pistol lowered. She stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. They said after Bitter Creek you went mad. That you dug Grace Vale's body from the ashes, convinced you could save her. But what you carried back to these mountains wasn't a girl, it was ashes, and a broken memory. You created me. Her face, her voice, all so you wouldn't have to hear the screaming child you killed. The words sliced him open, one by one. I'm not real, Caleb. I'm only the voice you built, to keep from listening to your own guilt. The wind surged. The shard slipped from his hand and shattered in the snow, splitting into 3 jagged mirrors. In them, for the briefest moment, he saw 3 versions of himself, the soldier, the survivor, the sinner. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. Nora, if that was her name at all, looked down with eyes that flickered between pity and frost. Punishment isn't dying, Caleb, she murmured. It's remembering everything. His scream tore from the valley, echoing against the mountains like a confession. When he lifted his head, she was gone. Only the body remained, frozen beneath the snow. A dead man with his face, his scar, and his eyes wide open, staring straight into his soul. The next morning, the sun returned. Light shattered across the snow-capped peaks, making the valley shimmer as if the world were being created anew. Caleb Rowan sat beside the body in the snow, his own face staring back at him. Yet now, it no longer terrified him. It was nothing more than a shell, a shadow of the man he once was, carrying the years of war and guilt he could no longer bear. He didn't know how long he stayed there. An hour. A lifetime. At last, he rose. With slow, deliberate hands, he shoveled snow over the corpse, gentle, as though laying a friend to rest. When the form was covered, he whispered, his voice low and final, "Rest now. I've remembered it all." The road back to the cabin was long and empty. No footprints, no sign of Nora Vale. The cabin stood just as before, but it no longer felt cold. The fire in the hearth had burned out, yet warmth still lingered, as if memory itself had finally unlocked its door. On the table lay a red scarf. He remembered. She always wore it when she stepped outside. He picked it up, but instead of tears, he smiled. Because now he understood. She had never been lost. She had never truly been there to begin with. She was a part of him. The part he buried that night at Bitter Creek. The part he feared to face. She was the shape of forgiveness. The next day, he set the cabin in order. The axe back on its hook. The clothes she had worn folded neatly away. Not from grief, but to place everything where it belonged. By evening, he stepped outside, gazing over the pines bathed in gold. The wind swept past, carrying with it the dried herbs she once hung on the porch. They circled him lightly, like the brush of a hand on his shoulder. And in that wind, he heard her voice. Distant, faint, but clear. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Caleb. It means accepting that it happened and daring to live anyway. He closed his eyes, drew in a deep, steady breath. For the first time, the mountain wind no longer pierced his chest. That night, by the fire, he carved a single line into the cabin wall, right where she once scratched her own. The memories you keep are what make you human. Then he dropped the knife and let the flames swallow the sound. On the final day of winter, he left the cabin. What did he carry with him? Only a red scarf, and a memory no longer heavy with shame. As he walked through the pines, fresh snow drifted down, covering his tracks. There was no one left to chase, no one left to hide from. Only a man, a soul, and a winter beginning to fade. They say, up on Bitterroot Mountain, when the wind shifts, sometimes you can hear the faint laughter of a woman in the snow. But Caleb Rowan never heard it again, because at last, he had forgiven himself.